Our lecture of the evening is the Song of Life. We all know that inanimate objects such as chairs and buildings and things like that are probably considered by most people to be wholly dead. And yet there is an expression, the happy house. And in going into many homes throughout America and the world, I have found that there are happy homes and sad ones. And I cannot help but feel that the consciousness of those who dwell there has something to do with either the happiness or the sense of tragedy that seems to haunt some houses. And I suppose that in matters such as the Song of Life, that this also applies. The great singer of songs, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the Eternal One, the Spirit, may release constantly into the atmosphere, into the aura of the planet, into the universe, a song that we may term the Song of Life. But unless there be an ear there to hear that song, and a mind to interpret what the ear hears, and a heart to love it and appreciate it, this song of life may never be heard, may be sung, but to deaf ears. So I would like tonight to talk about the development of the ear, the inner spiritual ear, so that the song of life can be heard. I believe it is a matter of discrimination and of attention. I believe that that attention has to come from someone who has faith that the song is being sung by the singer of songs. Oh yes, I know that it's being sung, but do all people know it? You know it too. But many people feel that life is somewhat a bitter experience. The senses pall on the mind. They become involved with the things of the world, and they take a sampling of practically everything. One man told me one time, he said, I've done just about everything there is to do. And I think that's true of a lot of people. And somehow or other, they do not always find in life that they are able to enjoy life even after having drunk the cup of life to its fullest. So this world is not satisfying in many cases to many people. And there is a hungering and a thirsting after true spiritual experience that somehow or other captures our mind and our heart. Now, none of us like to become involved in phony or affected doings. We want to be involved in something genuine and something real. And there is nothing more real than the song of life, the melody of happiness that is in the universe. You know, I don't think in reality, from my standpoint, from my experience, and I can't really speak for others, but I can speak for myself, I don't think that people really affect God adversely very much, if any. In other words, if people don't listen to that song, if they don't hear it, if they create all kinds of other conditions that create unhappiness, I don't think they move the basic motivation of the universe at all. I do think that they affect the lives of others, those they are able to influence, but I do not think they influence our Heavenly Father in the least. He states, mine eyes are too pure to behold inequity or iniquity. And therefore, he just keeps on, this great singer of songs, and he continues to weave the melodies of perfection and send those melodies out into the universe, where hopefully there are ears that are developed. Now, I would like to discuss with you tonight some of the things that I have experienced myself in connection with hearing this song of life. I remember many, many years ago when I was a child that I had an experience with passing by a little tent where a religious man was holding services. And then I went in as a child to that tent, and I heard the anathemas of the minister, and I heard the pathos and the insincerity of that man. But I did not believe at that time that I was listening to insincerity. I thought I was hearing the greatest thing that a man could ever hear, for I was well prepared for it. I had studied spiritual writings from the time I was a little child, and I had also had spiritual dreams in which I contacted the Christ. And so it seemed to me that all that I had read was solidified in that little tent meeting which I attended. I went by and I heard the minister thunder from the pulpit that the entire congregation was damned, that they were lost, that they were straying, that they were away from God, that there was none righteous, no, not one. And so I suppose it was a natural thing that in my response to what was to me the song of life at the time, that I should go up to his altar, even though the altar was sawdust and 2x4s, and kneel down in prayer and ask God to forgive me for all the awful, wicked things that I had done at the age of 12 or 13. But it happened. And so I became a member of his congregation until one day, many months later, and I had stopped in about 8 times to see him during that winter. That was after school. One day he said to me, he said, "I cannot answer you." And I had asked him this question. I said, "How can I become closer to God? How can I find God? I want to find him so bad." And he lapsed into a sort of a sullen silence. And about that time his wife turned to me, and she was a southern lady, and this is the way she spoke. She said, "Son, why do you come here and trouble us?" I thought to myself, what have I done? She said, "Don't make it necessary for us to call the sheriff to take you out of here." And I thought, what have I done? And I couldn't figure it out. And so I looked at her with a puzzled look on my face, and I said, "You want to call the sheriff to have me put out of your house?" And they couldn't answer me, but they sort of nodded almost mutely at that time, at that point. And she said, "Dad," she said to him, "let's pray him out." Well, I knew about that time, seeing that they were contacting possibly the sheriff and also contacting the Heavenly Father and wanting to pray me out, that probably I better do something. And so I said, "May I join you in prayer? I'll pray me out." And I got down on my knees, at which time one of the women that was there suddenly fell backwards and threw her hands up in the air and began to laugh. And that was my first contact with an entity, because the woman lapsed into a fit of laughing. And so I turned to the people and I said, "What is wrong with this woman? What is happening to her?" They said, "Oh, she's sanctified holy." I said, "What?" They said, "She's sanctified holy." I said, "Well, what's happening to her? Why is she laughing?" They said, "Oh, it's a laughing spirit." And so they continued to laugh, and I went out never to come back, because the Lord took me out of that place. And so the song of life was momentarily stilled, because the song of life was within me. It was part of the search. And it was bitter at the moment, because I had great love for the people, and I had great faith in what they were doing. I am convinced that similar situations have occurred to other people than myself. I have heard of them. Because there is nothing more frustrating in the world than the fact that in the field of religion where you expect to find God, you will also find a lot of kooks. And a lot of people who don't really understand what they're doing. I really suspect that I was just a little bit too big for those people in my spiritual quest. Do you understand? The questions I was asking. How can I find God? How can I improve my relationship with Him? These bothered these people because they were used to dealing with people who had simple little questions. And they did not consider the depth of my quest really simple. So the song of life went on, as it goes on for all. Because the song does not stop singing just because people create conditions that are disturbing. And then there came a time when I got into more spiritual work, and things happened to me that showed me that there are centers in the body of man that specifically belong unto God. Let me quote, "And out of thy belly shall flow rivers of living water." Those who have had the experience of actually receiving special grace from God know that sometimes there is an activity that can take place of where the Spirit will actually come into the belly of a man or a woman, and they will feel the presence of God as a giant heartbeat, not the heartbeat that is ordinary, the kind of a heartbeat that happens when you become excited, but a heartbeat that is unique because from the center of man to the very fingertips of his being, there is an awareness of the indwelling presence of the Spirit. So I experienced that also. And I received a great deal from God as a very small child, as a young man. And that also was part of the song of life. And then, years later, I joined a fraternity. And here's a very strange thing. This was not the Masons, so don't get that involved. Don't become involved with thinking I joined the Masons. I didn't. It was another fraternity. But I joined this fraternity seeking the song of life, seeking to find that which my heart told me I should find. And it was at this particular fraternity that I first came in contact with the Great White Brotherhood. For although the fraternity was actually wrong in many of the things that it did, it plagiarized the teachings of the Brotherhood and taught many of these things which it plagiarized. But some strange things happened to me there because the members of that fraternity knew how to awaken the spiritual centers in man, in the center of his forehead, in the heart center, and in various parts of the body. And so I learned how the Spirit of God and the contact with the Masters quickens the spiritual centers in man. My guru, El Moria Khan, came to me at that stage of my life, and the song of life went on. But when he came with waves of light. And I thought this was a strange phenomena at first. It was as though I were standing in an ocean of light, and these waves of light would come through the air. It was a song of life because it was melodic, even though it did not necessarily compose a melody that I could interpret. It was a melodic feeling It was a feeling of great joy, and it was electrical in nature. It electrified my mind. It electrified my emotions. It electrified my whole being. And after a while, I came to the point where every time that I would think of the Master, this vibration would flow through my whole body. And I became quite curious to find out if this happened to others also. And it did happen to many. I am sure that many of you have felt this electrical, tingling vibration that goes right through your body. If you don't mind, I'd like to hear from you in the sense that you would raise your hands if you've ever felt this feeling that I'm talking about. There's quite a few centers open here then. Thank you very much. In some people, the centers are not open, and therefore the feeling of the song of life, the melody that I'm talking about, the joy, the tremendous waves of joy, sweep over people, and they feel this inwardly in the soul, but they don't actually have it transmitted to their conscious mind. We have one brother here, I've told you about him before. He's a wonderful person, and he has attended for, I'd say, almost the better part of 10 years, Summit Lighthouse, and he doesn't feel, or he hasn't at least told me that he feels this, but he continues to come because he knows and senses the truth of the Masters. Everybody doesn't feel what I'm talking about, because everybody does not have their centers open. Now, this is what's happened in the case of those who have taken LSD. I have never taken it. I have never taken any drugs. But I probably have had more experiences than the people who have taken drugs. But primarily identifying with the great song of life, the constructivism that taps the secrets of the universe. And I believe that the experiences that have come to me, the experiences that I have had, are experiences that many others have also had, that is of a similar nature, but some have not. I dare say that what the taker of drugs has sought, we have found. And we have not found it in the Orthodox Church. But here's something you should know in order to be able to assess properly the various facets of life. God works with a lot of these people that are in the Orthodox Church just the same. Not all, and quite frankly, a very small amount of people by comparison with the number of people that do attend. But some of these people have had many spiritual experiences, and they're quite wonderful. I don't want any of our Summit Lighthouse people to get the idea that we have the world by the tail and that everyone else doesn't have anything. Because in reality, I know that God works with people all over. But it really is to a very small degree because too many people close the door and never open it, one of the two. As soon as they begin to get a little contact with God, after the initial experience, many of them think that they've completed it all because of the feeling. Well, I'm going to tell you right now that the feeling is only a phenomenon. And before you ever find the real, pure, true teachings of God and the pure vibration of God, you have to go beyond the feeling of bliss. A lot of Hindus and a lot of yogis, they function with various mantras, which are thousands of years old. And these mantras have been used by a lot of people. And they bring that feeling too after you get a certain amount of development. And that's a very strange thing. And I took note of this, that when I was in the church, I'm talking about the traditional church, and worshiping through the traditional church, and at the traditional altar, I would make contact with God, and I could even see in the Catholic Mass. I went in one day to a Roman Catholic church, in fact, more than one day, during the period of Mass, and I was able to see the Mass of the angels. These things are taking place, dear hearts, all the time, and most of the people that are sitting there in the church don't ever see them, because they don't have their centers open. They don't know what's going on. The priests don't know it either. In some cases they do, but very seldom. So they go through the rituals, and lo and behold, they invoke a lot of spiritual power. It comes down, the song of life is still singing, but nobody hears the voice. That is, most of the worshipers go in there, and they don't hear what's going on. And so I want to assure you that there are many transcendent things that are happening all the time where God is actually working with people and making every attempt to work with people. But in this day and age, there's too much poo-pooing. Too many people are saying, oh, there's nothing to that. Well, quite frankly, most of the traditional churches today are quite dead. They have permitted their form to more or less absorb their spirit. And they don't have much spirit, if any. What goes on there is primarily a manifestation of old ritual, and that goes on and produces a song of life too in many cases, because God is most merciful and loving to all life. But lo and behold, there are no hearers. So here, you see, in this activity, we teach people how to hear, how to listen. And that is why such wonderful results are occurring, because the song is being heard. Now, one thing you have to understand is this, that the song that you are hearing at first may be no more than a couple of bars. It may be just a line or two. And then later on you're going to hear more. And you're going to realize there is a lot more to hear. And after a while you'll hear a whole song. You'll hear the whole song of life, a whole melody. You'll feel the joy of the presence bubbling up within you. And this is going to make you a whole lot more contented than you were before. But here's the danger. After people have a little experience with God, they really do get the crazy opinion that that's the end of the game. Because on Monday they go out and they have a spiritual experience, they go somewhere, or they get into their secret closet and they pray and they have a great experience with God. Maybe it lasts a half hour. And they may even sit there in their closet with their hands like this, and they're just drinking in the light as it pours down, the radiation. Well, the next time they have an experience, there's a tendency for a person to withdraw. In other words, it reminded me of that statement that St. Germain made as Francis Bacon, where he said the more a woman is courted, the further away she runs. And the divine lady, that is somewhat that way. The Mother of God, the cult of the mother, the feminine aspect of God, even the masculine aspect of God. God seems to flee away sometimes the more you seek him. And most people don't realize why this is. First of all, there are many forces that are active in the chemical test tube of individuality. If we were a pure spirit, we wouldn't have so much trouble finding God. But you have the spirit, and you've added to it all kinds of minus factors. And a lot of these are very enmeshed with the personality. And after a while they get so, basically they sort of control the personality. The spirit doesn't control the form, but people, that is the pure spirit, but people come under the influence of various other manifestations that are in them. And so when they do get a little touch of God, they find that their enemies are they that are in their own household. I'm talking about themselves, in their own consciousness. And so these forces band together, and they have to be exorcised or cast out. You have to be patient with yourself as you begin to seek God. That's why a lot of time when people seek God, they get a whole shower of blessings, lasting, as I said, a half hour, a wonderful transcendent experience. The next time they seek God, they have 15 minutes. And they say, well, I must have done something wrong, and right away guilt comes into the picture. And as soon as you bring in guilt or ring in guilt, right away peace goes out the window. It's so easy for people to believe that they've made mistakes. Well, actually, they know they have. But God doesn't hold our mistakes against us. Supposing you were trying to interest a partner in engaging in a business with you, would you go out and have your partner investigated? Would you go ahead and then start tearing his life apart and say, well, listen, I want you to take a lie detector test. And then you'd ask him this question. You'd say, have you ever cheated anybody? Have you ever cheated on your wife? Have you ever done anything immoral in your life? And dig. You understand a partner probably, if he knows you quite well and has faith in your ability, he's not going to go out and probe you and then actually tear you apart in order to decide whether or not he should have you in his business. And God wouldn't even have to consult with one of the investigating agencies. Your record is already made with God. And he doesn't look at our record from the standpoint of saying, well, now this person's made a lot of mistakes. I'm not going to take them into partnership with me. The Father is more concerned with those that are lost, with those who have made mistakes, than he is probably with the 99 that are walking the straight and narrow. Heaven wants you to succeed. You got everything stacked in your favor if you're a sinner, if you've made mistakes and recognize it. But don't be condemned by what you've done in the past. Condemnation isn't going to free you. Condemnation is going to hinder you. And condemnation is the primary tool of the forces of darkness that keeps the song of life from being heard. The song of life is being sung by God in order to call us home, to show us the wonders that he has in store for us. It's tangible and real. And you don't really have to change your place of residence in order to be involved with it. You can live here. You can have friends. You can eat. You can sleep. You can be happy. You can be filled with joy. You can have all kinds of wonderful happenings. And there's an awful lot of your life that you can keep just as it is. Because if there's supposed to be change inside of you, that change will occur naturally. You don't have to have some kind of strained relations with God. You don't have to sign some kind of a pledge. Dear Father, I'll never make another mistake. I'm through with making mistakes. What you have to do is recognize that you've made errors in the past. Yes, you might make them in the future, but please don't make the same kind. Try to evolve, because evolvement is up to you. Heaven has already given us a formula for spiritual advancement, and I can't really see why a person should say, I'm sorry, Lord, my father just died. I've got to go home and bury him, as one man did. Or, I've got a lot of money, Father, and I want to spend it first, and as soon as it's gone, I'll join your group. You know? You can always dig up an excuse if you don't have one. And you can talk to God and say, well, I'll do it as soon as I get rid of this or change that. Stop rearranging your life if you really are interested in progress. try to realize that heaven is genuinely interested in you, and above all, try to realize that there's two of you occupying one body. What did you say? Two of me? That's right. St. Paul recognized that when he said, the evil that I would not do, that I do, and the good that I would do, that I do not. He recognized the duality. You know that old saying, the little girl with a curl in the middle of her forehead, when she was good, she was very, very good, and when she was bad, she was horrid. We have our Dr. Jekylls and our Mr. Hydes. And we have to understand that in coming to a place where our best nature prevails, we are going to contend with what we ourselves produced in past lives and even the fruit of that which we have created in this one. It's not going to cease all at once. Pennies from heaven. I mean, you don't pay your bills all year, and then at the end of the year you're suddenly going to throw pennies at people and say, here's your money. No. Try to place it on the basis of a day-to-day balancing of the books with God. Try to listen to the song of life. Give a little of your time to the great singer of songs and learn to love him. Try to learn to listen. Now you can develop extrasensory perception without developing spirituality at all. It's time that I explain to some of you that the purposes in living are not to contact the dead, but the living. I don't mean that when someone dies, they can't be contacted. How many of you remember the story of Saul and the Witch of Endor? Well, there's enough people that don't remember it that I better tell it. Poor old Saul, he was really very worried because it was the eve of a great battle, and the prophet Samuel was dead. He'd rather depended on him in a way, and everyone knew that Samuel the prophet was someone who really could give you an answer to your question. But now Samuel was dead. So King Saul decided that perhaps he could consult with someone who had a familiar spirit, namely the Witch of Endor. So he called on the Witch of Endor. Well, the witch was a sort of a faker. She actually was used to manipulating people just like some of the fortune tellers and palm readers are. They have a pretty good line, and they make a pretty good living doing it. So the Witch of Endor was this way. And Saul came to see the Witch of Endor. So she started going through her mumbo-jumbos. But in the meantime, there was a little mumbo-jumbo going on in heaven. And God decided, because of something wicked that Saul was doing, that he was going to allow the spirit of Samuel to actually appear at this seance. So, God did something that raised up the spirit of Samuel. And this is right in the Bible, and it's most interesting. Do you know what happened? Why, lo and behold, I don't know whether out of the pot or in the pot or where it came from, but lo and behold, there was the spirit of Samuel. And the witch was frightened out of her skin. She was so frightened she just was trembling. And these are the words that Samuel said. Why troublest thou me? I am among the dead. Why don't you leave me there? So old Saul, he heard this hollow echo coming from way beyond the grave and saw this figure, and he wasn't as scared as the witch at first. But when Samuel answered his question, he says, what's going to happen to me tomorrow at the battle? And Samuel said, tomorrow you shall be as I am, among the dead. Old Saul was really trembling in his boots. And of course it happened too. But it happened by his own hand, because the battle went against him. He took his own sword out and committed hara-kiri, long before the Japanese were practicing it. So we should realize that that which stills the song of life is the dabbling in necromancy. And I'm going to tell you why. It's primarily because of the karmic patterns. Man that's embodied here on earth, if his mother or his father dies, or his sister or his brother, he should leave them alone and commit them into the hands of God. They have a future. They'll either be reborn or they'll ascend. Now the question has been asked, can people ascend after they die? The answer is yes. Mary Baker Eddy ascended 30 years after her death, and she became the goddess of wisdom. She was the Mary of Martha and Mary and Lazarus fame. That is who she was. She was Mary then, at the time that Jesus said, "Thou hast chosen the better part." My wife was Martha. That's Elizabeth. And I was the young John Mark at that time. I wasn't as old as most of the disciples were. I was a smaller boy. But I grew up and later had many experiences, many of which I recall. I recall one that I'd rather not tell you about. Oh, yes, I can. I've told a few people, but usually men only. It's in the Bible. You'll see what happened to me. It doesn't identify me by name. That's the beauty of it. Thank God for anonymity. I didn't do what Peter did, but I did run away for a while. Later on, of course, I became a scribe and a writer of the gospel. And I have lived some of these things. But the song of life does not go on just for one specific lifetime. It continues. And if at first you don't succeed, try again, you'll succeed at last. But you know something? I wouldn't want to waste a lifetime and go back into the dark and dabble around. I've tried and I've striven most of this life to try to find God. Oh yes, I'm still trying. I don't feel that God can be acquired and put into like a pig in a poke. I don't think you can find all of God in one lifetime. I think it goes on unto your ascension, and from what I've learned from the masters, they are still, in many cases, in schools, where the masters are taking training also. And you probably sit down here now and you say, what do you mean the masters are taking training? I thought they were completely graduated. Oh yes, they've graduated all right. But then people graduate from a junior high, and they graduate from high school, and they graduate from college, and they graduate from postgraduate work, and they still go back to school. And the masters are still, in many cases, taking training. I think the great divine director is probably not involved in such things because of his rank and his standing. I think also Saint Germain is probably not taking studies. He's probably teaching. But I do know that there are ascended beings that sit in the classrooms in the Grand Tetons at various times. When the masters come, when Sanat Kumara comes, and when other of the great beings come, and they listen. And they revel and rejoice in their conclaves. I know a lot of you people down here think, well, must I always come to a class and sit there? Well, you're going to be doing it after your ascension as well. And the only problem is that you're going to be trying to make embodied people hear the song of life. You're going to find that they may not pay any attention to you at all. for long periods. They may neglect you or not recognize you or not in any way respond to you. And if you don't think that that's a frustrating experience, let me tell you that you're going to get into more frustrating experiences after your ascension. Some of you remember and recall how St. Germain had karma with a panther. Any of you remember that? Yeah. So any karma that you get engaged in life may be expiated after you have passed into the ritual of the ascension. You only have to balance 51% of your karma in order to ascend. Wouldn't it be a frightful thing if we had to balance 100% of our karma? Why, it'd be devastating. How many people would ascend? We'd be here for millenniums. But God's grace and the karmic board's love has been sent to us, and so all that is required by the great cosmic law in order to receive your ascension is to balance 51% of your karma. I want you to know that the little baby you saw today had balanced over 51% of her karma in her last life, and she was offered the ascension, and she refused. She said, "May I come back?" That's how she put it. "May I come back and serve the brotherhood on earth? I want to do it." And the request was granted by the karmic lords. And she's not the only one. This is, of course, almost a bodhisattva ideal, although the bodhisattva usually remains here for the period of the whole salvation of the earth, once they've dedicated themselves to that ideal. We have in caves in the Himalayas such people who have dedicated themselves to remaining on earth as a cosmic being almost until the last man or woman is free on this planet. That's quite a bit of love, isn't it? Quite a bit of devotion. Because actually they don't get much out of worldly functions. I mean, they're not here to marry. They're not here to eat. They're not here to sleep. They're not here for anything except helping people. And they do it 24 hours a day. Their very presence is tremendous upon this earth, just as the presence of Sanat Kumara was such a help to this world, the Ancient of Days, for so long. Now I'm talking about the spiritual arousing to respond to the song of life. I'm talking about a spiritual arousing that creates vibrational ripples and patterns that just thrill your soul. But I want to tell you something tonight that is so important that I want everyone to remember it. And that is that God is behind bliss, the curtain of bliss. And those that love God just for the good feeling that He sends them are not the true devotees He seeks. We have to go beyond feelings, beyond joy, beyond what seems to be the fringe benefits, the fringe benefits on the metaphysical circuit. Naturally, I think that in the matter of metaphysics and spiritual cosmogony and all the teachings of the masters, I think beyond it all is the realization that God as God's work, God as the natural law of Dharma, is most important to the world. Because in reality, it's just a few people on earth, and you can be one of them, that are involved in the giving of the total self to God in order to reap the benefits of serving his fellow man. Jesus proved this when he girded himself the night before, I think it was the night of the Passover, and he took a towel. You've seen people do things like this. He took a towel out, and he wrapped the towel around himself, and he got down on his knees. Did you ever know this? He got down on his knees, and he called for a bowl of water, a bucket of water. And he kneeled before every single one of the apostles. And he said, I'm going to wash your feet. And they looked at him and they said, especially Peter. Peter was kind of a big, tough fisherman, you know, and he just didn't like the idea of the master washing his feet. He wanted to wash the master's feet. So he says, "You're not going to wash my feet, never." And Christ looked at him with his big eyes and he said, "If I don't wash thee, thou hast no part with me." And he says, "Lord," he says, "not only my feet, but my hands and my head also." It was very beautiful. And so the example the master gave was the one of saying, "He that would be great among you, let him become the servant of all." Now, I had the funniest experience. One time going by a Salvation Army little, you know, one of these girls that sits in the middle of the street with a little pot, looks like a witch's pot or something, you know, and they sit there with those funny little red hats on, or black hats with red. It says Salvation Army. They sit there and they ring a bell at Christmas time. You know what I'm talking about. And I got out a 50-cent piece, and then next year I think I put $1 in, and I was looking at that girl and I said, "Well, there are hungry people in the world." I said, "I better give $1. And of course, you know, I didn't have a lot of money, you know, or anything like that, and $1 with my family was a little, and so I came up and I dropped $1 in, and I prayed that nobody would ever notice me do it, because I didn't want anybody to see that I was giving $1 or anything. I didn't want them to know it. And immediately, waves of cosmic joy came back to me. And I have had this happen time on time again, so that I know that it is more blessed to give than to receive. And when I think of that example of the master getting down and saying, "He that will be great, let him be the servant of all," I realize that this takes in a lot of things. It doesn't just take in one thing, it takes in a lot of things. When you're up and doing something for the good of your fellow men, why, that is constructive, and that's what we should be doing. You know, I sometimes think these scout masters, the men that go ahead and serve a group of boys without pay in many cases, spending 10 and 20 years of their lives, taking boys up on field trips into the mountains. I sometimes think they are doing a great deal to assist the song of life. I don't think people really understand how this works. They don't understand that God doesn't go ahead and judge everything from a religious standpoint, because God isn't very religious. He's God. He doesn't have to be. We are the religious. We down here, once we get to the point where we're involved with God, we won't be religious either. We'll be God. You understand the difference? I mean, I'm not in any way speaking disparagingly of God. I'm speaking very honorably of him. But the point is, he doesn't have to be religious, because who is he going to worship? Who is he going to assist except us? God is involved with the whole universe, with all of nature, and with all of people. And he truly is interested in serving mankind. I feel that God is the greatest servant of all. And if we want to emulate him, why, we'll be involved. Just take for a minute and look around you. Look around you in this room and see how you'd like to be the one that had to serve all these people. And then stop and consider what a small segment of people are here. And think of all the people in the world that God has to serve. He really gets involved. And you know, every time somebody cracks up, like that psychologist that's here and I were talking about the girl that cracked up and got possessed with demons and all that, every time somebody cracks up, God is still in that person. Did you realize that when someone becomes alienated from reality, that God is still in prison in that body? The body and soul are there. And every time a person loses contact with the song of life, every time their ears become dull of hearing, God still has to work and keeps on trying faithfully to work to awaken that person. Isn't that a wonderful thing? Why, just stop and think what he's doing. And what does he get out of it? just exactly what we put into it. So we are important to God. Is it any wonder that love is enhanced in by the song of life? Is it any wonder that responses are appreciated in heaven? Don't you think that God wants to be loved for his own sweet sake, not just because he's a bank account? He's a lovelorn agency where he goes ahead and finds mates for lonely hearts. He's involved as a great healer. He's involved as supplying the whole cornucopia of what man wants, of all human needs. Don't you think that he'd like to be loved just for his own sweet sake? How do you think a man would feel if he were 70 years old and he had $1 million and some young girl came along and married him for his money? If he was at all perceptive, don't you think that he'd realize that the only reason she married him was so she could have his money? Don't you think so? I do. Well, there's a lot of people treat God this way. The only reason they seek God is for a meal ticket. You know, what they can get out of him. It's what we put into him, because we are God. This is not a blasphemy. It is a statement of truth. We are the song of life, and the song is sung through us, and the melody is put into our heart, and we don't hear it. The very melody that emerges from us, the antakarana that comes from our own body, it's all there, wound up within us. It never comes out, and we die without fulfilling our purpose. Ships that pass in the night, the saddest of words of tongue or pen are these: it might have been. Do you see? We don't have to listen to that kind of words. It might have been, because it can be. There's a man that wrote a book a while ago, and he tells a very interesting story. He said one time he was stopping in a hotel, and he was sitting in the hotel on the bed, and there was a big factory across the river, and the factory was something like the American underwear company, or the American can company. You know what I'm talking about. It was just the word American. You've seen a lot of companies that start out that way. And big, tall buildings hid AMER. And all he saw out that window was I can. And when he looked at that, he said to himself, why, I can. He said that is the most powerful affirmation. And it's pretty close to I am, you know. He says, I can do it. And he started out with that, affirming it. I can, and then I will. And that's the two keys that enable us to hear the song of life. I can hear it. I will hear it. Won't you make up your mind tonight, forever, that you are going to be one of those people on this planet that hears the song of life? Wouldn't you like to be someone that stirs God's heart? Well, I'm going to tell you one of the greatest secrets that I've never told to audiences before. Nowhere in America have I ever told this simple little secret. I'm going to tell it to you tonight. It is this, that I use this formula constantly. You know what it is? It's very simple. I always try to figure how I can send happiness to God. I think of God as real and genuine as He is, and I say to myself, I've got full faith that I can stimulate God. Because he put something inside of me that I can stimulate him. And if you stop and think about it, you people who have children, can't your children stimulate you? Did you ever see your little son or your daughter come up to you and throw their arms around your neck and just say, "I love you, Daddy"? Aren't you stimulated by it? Don't you think the Godhead is stimulated by hearing a genuine, sincere little statement like that from a child mind down here on this planet? Don't you think it pulls on the heartstrings of God? Well, then you read the parable of the unjust judge. How many here know it? Gee, I better tell it. The Bible says that there was a certain woman that had a problem. A lot of women have problems, unfortunately. This woman had a problem. And she said to herself, she says, "I'm going to meet with that judge over there when he comes out of the courthouse." This was in the Bible. And she said, "I'm going to see him, have a talk with him about my problem." And so she approached him. But he was unapproachable. And he said, "No." He said, "I'm too busy." He went on his way. It was on Monday. On Tuesday, she was there again in the morning, and she said, "Judge, I want to speak to you." He said, "I'm busy." Wednesday, she was there again, and on through the week. And God only knows, I don't remember exactly how long it took her to accomplish this. But one day the judge came out and he said, "Lest this woman weary me by her continual coming, I will grant her the request to talk to me." And that parable applies to God. You just bother the dickens out of God. He likes it. In reality, he likes to be tantalized a little bit. And I know he doesn't have an ego. We don't need a psychologist or a psychiatrist or anybody for God. But he wants to help, is what I'm trying to tell you. But he also wants to have you really be active. He wants to know that you're not just joking or just doing this for an experiment. So he expects you to keep on and keep on and keep on asking. And you do that with your decrees too, you know, until you get an answer. But do pray when you ask that God will give you the wisdom to know what to ask for. And I found this is also very helpful in my life. I asked him about this activity, I think about 20 years ago. And I said, "Father, I'd like to have an activity that can be for your glory and yours alone, filled with sincere people that need whatever you have to offer. And I want you to give me what I really should have. Give me the knowledge. Give me the training. Give me the development so that I can hear the song of life." And only the Father has answered. And what he has done for one, he can do for you. The Brotherhood has a saying, "What man has done, man can do." Because man is a manifestation of God. Let's keep listening. Thank you.